Stop! Before you click away, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is not a game, it's not fiction. This actually happened in real life. I have for you a compilation of 3 very scary, true stories from the r/scarystories community on Reddit. You won't believe what happens in the last story, so watch the video till the end. Until now, if you get scared easily, leave. This is your only warning. But if you're brave enough to stay, it will be one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in your life. Before we start, subscribe to Mikey HR and hit the like button. If you haven't watched these 2 videos, you've missed out on a lot. You can watch it on the channel after this video. I spend hours finding these stories so you don't have to. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything. Now, turn off the lights. And let's begin. Story 1. My son has been staring at something behind me since the day he was born. June 18th was both the best and the worst day of my life. Due to health concerns, my wife had been scheduled for a C-section. My heart filled with joy as the nurses gently handed me my newborn son as I sat in the recovery room. My eyes filled with tears as I stared into the tiny face of my now sleeping infant. I'd do anything for this child. Slowly, I tore my eyes away from him to look up to the nurse. "When can we see his mom?" I asked. Her eyes widened slightly. "They're finishing up as we speak. Don't worry, someone will come and get you when she's ready to see you." After walking me through using a bottle and explaining the call button, she left with a cheery, "Don't be afraid to call one of us if you need help." There I was, alone with my son. So many thoughts filled my mind. How I wished I had been a better man, how I longed to be a better father than mine, who had abandoned me at 12. As I stared into the angel-like face of my son, I felt scared, proud, and motivated to be the best dad I could be. As the hours passed, my joy slowly became replaced with a new feeling. Worry. Where was Jessica? What was taking so long? Was this normal? Later that evening, a solemn doctor entered the room. "It's Grant, isn't it?" he said. "Yes, sir, that's right. Where's my wife? What's going on?" I said as I rose to my feet. He swallowed hard before saying, "I'm sorry, Grant. There was a serious complication, a heavy bleed, and well, I'm sorry, but your wife has passed away." I couldn't breathe. It felt like all the air had been forced out of my lungs. I fell back into my chair as a muffled scream finally exited my mouth. The tears soon followed. And almost as if he could sense my pain, my son joined in. A moment I will never forget. Through my own tears, I reached out to comfort my crying son. I cradled him in my arms, whispering to him that everything was going to be okay. All the while, my tears gently ran down my cheeks and dropped softly out his little head. Soon he calmed down. As he did, I held him out to look him in the face. And for the first time, his little eyes opened to see the world around him. He had his mother's eyes. I smiled, choking back more tears. "Hello, David." Jessica loved that name. It was her top choice. "I love you, son, and Mommy loves you too." I gazed into my son's perfect face. In a way, it was like staring at his mother. For a moment, hope and resolve filled my mind. My Jessica had given me a great gift. I loved David more fiercely than I'd ever loved anyone. I promised myself, there and then, to give David the world. I noticed then something that didn't bother me at the time. David's beautiful little eyes didn't look back into mine. Instead, they stared off into the empty space just above my left shoulder. That was 5 years ago. It hasn't been easy being a single dad. Several years ago, I got the courage to ask my boss if I could do the majority of my work from home. Really, all that's required to work in accounting nowadays is a laptop and a good Wi-Fi connection. My boss was gracious enough to agree when he heard of my situation. Years as a corporate accountant have allowed me to afford a small home in the suburbs that is more than enough room for the two of us. David has grown into a healthy and happy little boy. Next month he will be 5. His light blonde hair and deep blue eyes remind me so much of his mother. His smile and laughter light up any room, and my life is altogether better because of my boy. Yet something strange has been happening lately. I suppose that's why I'm writing this. Maybe someone out there will know what's happening or what I should do. Ever since his first day of life, I've noticed David staring at something behind me. When he was an infant, they told me don't worry about it. It takes time for baby's eyes to focus and identify faces from random objects. In no time, I should notice him doing it less and less. When the doctor said this, I was relieved. But the only thing is, that's not what happened. He never stopped. As a 1-year-old, he would look vaguely in my direction, but as I got closer, it was clear he was looking behind me, not at me. He would adjust when I talked to him. I'd say, "Hi, David." His eyes would shift from looking over my shoulder to looking into my eyes. "Hi, Dada," he would say with a smile. But as I lost his attention, his gaze would move behind me. He would just stare at nothing. Every now and again, he would smile at nothing, shake his head yes and yell, "Yeah," or shake his head no and yell, "No, no." This concerned me as a first-time parent. I had no idea what was normal toddler behavior and what wasn't. I remember that at one point, out of pure uncertainty, I called my deadbeat mom. All her life, my mom was unable to turn away from the same vices that ruled her when I was a child. Though she was now nearly 60, she was not very different from the alcoholic, drug-addicted 25-year-old I remember from my childhood. "What do you want?" Her loud, raspy smoker's voice startled me. "Mom, it's me," I said back into my phone. "Oh, Grant, it's you, baby. What do you want?" came the reply. "I just wanted to ask you, is it normal for toddlers to stare off at nothing?" After a moment, she said, "How should I know? What do you think I am? Some sort of child psychologist? I'm sure whatever is eating at you is fine. Kids are kids. Who knows why the hell they do what they do? Look, Grant, I really have to go." With that, she hung up the phone. Putting down the phone, I muttered to myself, "Thanks a lot, Mom." Over David's toddler years, the doctors didn't seem to be concerned either. I often heard, "Oh, that's not really a concern. He's probably just a little shy." Some kids take longer developing socially, not a big deal. Shortly after David's 4th birthday, I finally convinced myself that it was not a big deal. David was such a sweet and caring little boy. He wasn't antisocial, though it was difficult finding friends his age. Overall, he was very smart for his age. So then why was I concerned? I needed to accept him for who he was and not try to change him. I decided then not to be bothered by it anymore. The following months were good. Work was going smoothly. I was finally starting to make some friends in the neighbor, and David would be starting kindergarten in the fall. Life was finally feeling normal. Up until last month, when suddenly in the middle of the night, I heard quiet whispering coming from David's room. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I slowly walked the short hallway from my room to David's. I cracked the door open as quietly as I could. Just in case I had misheard, I didn't want to wake him. His dark room was gently lit by a little night lamp, which cast strange shadows on the walls. My body tensed up slightly as I saw David. He sat on the floor back to me in the door as he stared into an empty corner of the room. He wasn't staring straight ahead into the corner. Rather, his head was looking slightly up as he stared off somewhere near the ceiling. He was whispering. I heard him say things like, "I'm glad you're here. Can I come with you? Do you want to play?" I was creeped out. I felt certain he must be sleepwalking, although that is creepy nonetheless. I quietly opened the door farther before saying, "David, what are you doing? It's past bedtime. We can play tomorrow." He went quiet and didn't move. A moment later, he whispered, "He says it's bedtime. I have to go," before standing up and silently returning to his bed. He fell asleep instantly. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day was a Saturday. I still felt pretty unnerved about last night, so as we sat at the breakfast table and I watched David eat his bowl of Fruit Loops, I asked, "Hey buddy, do you remember when Daddy came to your room last night?" David didn't even look up from his cereal. He just said, "Yeah." "Who were you talking to last night?" "My friend?" I was puzzled. "Your friend? Does he have a name?" He nodded. "His name is Billy." I frowned. "Is Billy always in your room?" He shook his head. "No." "Do you know where Billy is?" He looked up, but not at me, past me. "Yeah, he's behind you." At that moment, I felt on the back of my neck the slightest movement of air, almost like someone directly behind you breathing on your neck. I don't know why, but I didn't want to turn around, but I forced myself to turn my head and look behind me. Of course, there was nothing there, just our empty kitchen. That evening, we had been invited to a cookout with the new family that moved into the house across the street. They had a young boy named Clay, who was a little over a year older than David, and the two had become fast friends. Shortly after lunch, David asked to go over to Clay's to play before the cookout. I had to catch up on some work projects, so I told him to go ahead and to have fun. After watching to be sure that he had crossed the street safely, I retreated to my office, put my earbuds in, and got to work. After about an hour in, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. Thinking David had come back home and needed something, I took out my earbuds and spun around in my chair, ready to greet him. But David wasn't there. In fact, no one was. I was alone. Confused, I walked around the house, calling for David. As I passed by the front window, I peeked out and saw David and Clay playing joyfully on the lawn across the street. Swallowing hard, I turned to face my empty house. Tried my best to convince myself that I was just tired and must have imagined it. That night was great. The cookout was just what David and I needed. The time with other parents made me feel like I wasn't the only one struggling with raising my son. I stood next to Clay's dad, Brad, as he manned the grill. We talked about our work, sports, and our hobbies. Brad was easy to get along with. He was charismatic and easygoing. I anticipated we would become fast friends. "Hey Brad, question for you," I said as he started pulling the hot dogs off the grill. "Shoot," he replied. "Did Clay ever have an imaginary friend?" He chuckled. "Why? Does David have an invisible buddy?" "Yeah, and it's really weirding me out. Maybe it's just because it's just the two of us, but I don't know, kind of creeping me out." "Well, to answer your question, yeah, Clay had one of those for a while, called it Mr. Buttons. I got a buddy who's a counselor, and he said it's pretty normal and can actually help their imagination develop, so I wouldn't worry too much about it." I nodded. "Thanks, man, that helps. I'm sure my wife would have known what to do, and I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel like I know what I'm doing." He put his hand on my shoulder. "We all feel that way from time to time, but you can always come to us for help. After all, it takes a village." He handed me a plate with a hot dog on it. "Thanks, man, for everything." 9 p.m. rolled around and everyone started heading home. David held my hand as we crossed the street back to our house. In the middle of the street, he looked up at me and said, "Daddy, could my friend do a sleepover tonight?" "Well, I guess we could go ask Clay's parents, but it's kind of late." He giggled. "No, not Clay, Billy." "Billy?" "Yeah, Billy wants to spend the night, can he, please?" I hesitated, but then remembered Brad's words. "Yeah, I think that would be fine." Then jokingly added, "But maybe we should ask Billy's parents first." David laughed. "Billy doesn't have parents. He's very old." Somehow that didn't make me feel any better. The rest of the summer was mundane, as much as I didn't like it. I got used to my son talking more and more about his imaginary friend. A month before David started kindergarten, I found him sitting alone in a corner of his room. He was quietly crying, his knees were brought up close to his chest, and his forehead rested upon them. "David, what's wrong?" He looked up when I spoke, snuffled and wiped his nose with his hand. "Nothing," he weakly said. I walked in and sat on the floor next to him, gently wrapping my arm around him. "What's going on, big guy?" I asked softly. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat there sobbing quietly. After a few moments, I heard a low whisper, "Daddy?" "Yes, David?" I whispered back. "Where's Mommy?" A lump formed in my throat. This is the type of conversation the parenting books don't prepare you for. "Well, son, Mommy got really sick and, well..." Tears formed in my eyes. I had no idea how to have this talk. "Well, she died, son." David's wet eyes looked at me, not sure what I meant. "Billy says she didn't want me, so she left." I could feel a wave of anger coming over me. Jessica had given her life to have David. Of course she wanted him. But I remembered this was David trying to understand why everyone else had a mom and why he didn't. He was struggling with death and using Billy as a guise to voice feelings. I'm sure he felt. "No, not at all, son. She loved you very much. She just got really sick and had to leave. It's not because of you at all. She wanted you so much." He looked at me. "Is she ever coming back?" Holding back tears, I slowly shook my head and whispered, "No, I'm afraid not. Billy says he saw her leave." I pulled my son in close for a tight hug as tears ran down my face. "It's not true, David. Billy wasn't there. Mommy loved you very much, and so do I." He hugged me back. "I love you too, Daddy." The last few weeks of summer, a change took place in my son. David had always been a shy kid, but he had become downright quiet. He spent less and less time with Clay and the other kids of the neighborhood, and more time wandering the halls and rooms of our home, despite my best efforts to get him to go play with his friends. As I drove him to the kindergarten for the first time, it dawned on me that David had become a completely different child. He rarely looked me or anyone else in the eye. He simply stared at the ground. My heart broke. As I looked at my son in the rear-view mirror, he reminded me of another little boy. A little fatherless boy whose absent mother didn't care. A little boy who shut himself off from the world. Seeing my son like this reminded me of myself. "Hey buddy, you're gonna have so much fun and meet so many new people today, and when you get home, how about you and I go to the park?" He just stared out the window. "Okay," he replied. After dropping him off and returning to my car, I sat there in the parking lot. I hoped beyond hope that David would forget about Billy as he met new friends at school. And for the first couple weeks, it seemed like that was the case. His mood lightened. He smiled more. I felt like I had gotten my little boy back. That is, until I got a phone call. "Hello, this is Grant," I said into my phone. "Hello, Grant. This is Ms. Perkinson from your son's school. David is currently sitting in my office at the request of his teacher, Mrs. Williams. It seems he has been upsetting his fellow students. If you are available, could you please come and pick him up? I'll be right there, I said, barely masking my confusion. What was going on? David had never acted up in this way before. What was happening to my son? As I got into my car, I couldn't help but think of my wife. I miss you, Jess, I whispered aloud. David could really use his mom right now. As I entered the principal's office, I saw my son sitting silently in a chair, staring at the ground. Across the desk sat Miss Perkinson, who was tenderly trying to encourage him to speak. He looked up at me when I walked in, before his eyes moved to the empty corner across the room, where they remained fixated. Miss Perkinson stood and walked to me. In a whisper, she said, "Thank you for coming, Grant. David has been drawing some rather disturbing pictures." She handed me a folded piece of paper. He won't listen to his teacher. Normally, he's such a good boy. This is very unusual. We're hoping some extra time with his dad will help. Thank you, Miss Perkinson. I'll take it from here. Turning to David, I said, "Hey, buddy, we're going to spend the day together. How's that sound?" He stood up, but his eyes didn't leave the corner until I reached for his hand. As we walked out of the school, I unfolded the paper Miss Perkinson handed me. On the paper was a crude drawing of 3 stick figures. It looked like it was drawn in anger. The crayon strokes looked like they were pushed hard and aggressively. 2 of the figures stood together holding hands. One was a little boy with a wide smile on his face. The other was an extremely tall figure, completely black. Its arms and legs were far longer than its torso. Further down on the paper, the third figure, lying horizontally on the page, its face was clearly sad, and red blots covered its body. I looked down at my son. "David, did you draw this?" He stared at the ground and shook his head no. "Billy did." I swallowed and asked, "Is that you and Billy holding hands?" He nodded. "And the other one? Is that me?" He sniffled before nodding. As we reached the car, I got down on one knee to look him in the eye. "David, could you look at me?" Slowly, his head looked up. I could see his eyes quiver as he struggled to hold back tears. My heart broke with compassion as I pulled him in for a hug. "David, I love you so much. I don't tell you that enough, and I'm sorry. You mean everything to me. I know Billy has been your friend, but right now it seems like he's not being a good friend. You should know, though, I'll always be your friend. I love you, son." He violently rubbed his eyes. "I love you, Daddy." As we pulled into the driveway, I turned to David and said, "How about you go change into your pajamas, and we'll watch some movies together. Later we can get some pizza. How's that sound?" At that, my son perked up. With a smile, he responded, "Okay." He trotted upstairs as I browsed the TV for a good movie. A moment later, a loud scream broke through the house. Adrenaline shot through my veins as I sprinted upstairs. Bursting through the bedroom door, I shouted, "David, are you okay?" I saw him lying in the corner. His body shook with uncontrollable cries. I rushed to him, gently turned him over to see his face. The left side of his face was deeply bruised, and a thin stream of blood flowed from his lip. "David, what happened?" Through tears, he said, "Billy's mad." "What?" I declared in disbelief. I told him I don't love him anymore, and now he's mad. My body shook with anger as I sprung to my feet. I turned and screamed to the empty room, "Who's there? Get the hell out of my house. Leave us alone." In my rage, I kicked the ball that sat in the middle of David's floor. It sailed through the air and landed in the open closet. My rant continued. Soon my anger lessened, and I stopped shouting to catch my breath. In the monetary silence, I heard a noise. I spun around in time to watch the ball I had kicked slowly roll out of the closet. Every hair on my body stood up. Without taking my eyes from the closet, I reached around for the baseball bat that lay under David's bed. My fingers found it, and taking it, I viciously swung it into the small closet. There was nothing there. The bat bounced off the wall in the back. I pushed aside the hanging clothes and found nothing. I turned back to see David, and as I did, I felt impossibly strong fingers wrapped around my neck. I gasped for air but didn't find any. Panic began to fill my mind as a cruel, cracked whisper from behind. "He belongs to me." The room erupted with deep, gurgled laughter as I struggled for air. Then suddenly the fingers released, though the laughter remained. Air flooded into my lungs as I fell to my knees. I glanced behind me and saw nothing. Then I looked at my son, who cowered into the corner. His hands tightly covered his ears as he tried to drown out the laughter. In a moment I reached him, carried him in my arms, and dashed to the stairway. The laughter continued throughout the house. It wasn't until we got outside that it stopped. I'm writing this from a hotel room. David and I are leaving. I don't know where we're going, just not here. David looked at me, his face completely pale. "Daddy?" "What?" "He's here," he whimpered. A knot formed in my throat. "He says he's going to kill you." He barely got the words out. I clenched my teeth and stared deep into my son's eyes. "Where is he?" He stares back at me before slightly glancing over my shoulder. "Behind you." Story 2, I hooked up with a guy from the bar. I think he put something inside me. I just got out of a pretty bad breakup about a month and a half ago. My ex and I had been together for a year before I realized he was a total piece of shit and that there was absolutely no future I could see with him. I did love him, though. It was definitely hard to break things off. I spent a few weeks moping before deciding that I needed the sun again. I needed to socialize. That's how I ended up in the bar last night. I'd spent the night out on the town with some girlfriends, and all of us were already pretty tipsy when we arrived. My girlfriends were pretty loud and rowdy, and in hindsight, I'm a little embarrassed by the scene they were causing. Not to mention that's what made him keep looking at me. He kept glancing over at our booth from his spot at the bar, and oh my God, I'd never seen someone so handsome. I couldn't even blame it on the drinks, because my girlfriends were admiring him too. He had this perfectly kept beard, a jawline that could cut diamonds, and I kept thinking his hair looked like Johnny Depp's in the movie Cry Baby. Even though he had 4 women absolutely swooning over him, it seemed like his interest remained on me. He was cutting through me with the most intense eyes I'd ever seen. And when he specifically bought me a drink, I had no choice but to give in. What was I supposed to do? Pass up the opportunity? Besides, I needed this. It was the perfect way to get my mind off my ex. It's not like I wanted to date the guy. I just wanted to have a little fun. Nothing could have prepared me for how much of a smooth talker he was. We chatted. We flirted. He kept buying us rounds. My girlfriends were starting to wrap up the night, but I wasn't ready to end things just yet. He invited me back to his apartment. Normally, I'd be too nervous to ever agree, but I guess the mixture of my breakup, the alcohol, and the fact that I was feeling adventurous got the better of me. He bought us one more round of drinks, but I don't remember him taking his shot of bourbon. I actually don't remember much after that. I remember stumbling to his car. I remember him buckling me into the passenger seat. Then, after that, everything just started hitting me in waves. My head swam, my vision blurred. I just watched as streetlights turned to trees, before we pulled into a parking lot. It wasn't an apartment complex. It was a fucking Motel 6. I was too weak to fight. He kind of just grabbed me out of the passenger seat before guiding me up the stairs and toward his room. He threw me on the bed, his face looking cold and callous, and I was out like a light. When I woke up this morning, I was still in bed in that dingy motel room. I was in my underwear. Neither my bra nor my panties had been removed. It smelled of mildew, mold, and a faint scent of copper. I was groggy, and when I tried lifting myself up, a shooting pain ran down the length of my torso. It was a blinding kind of pain. My eyes shot down to my side, and what I saw made me nauseous. I threw up right there in the bed, sending another wave of pain through what I could now see was a row of stitches running from my rib cage down to my waistline. Obviously, my mind went straight to what I thought was the worst case scenario. But the horrific part is that I don't think he stole something at all. I think he put something inside me. I can hear it ticking. I can see the faint glow of a screen beneath the stitches. And I'm absolutely terrified to find out what it is. Story 3, I pick locks for a living. These are some of my most unusual calls. I've been a locksmith for a little over a decade now. Working this profession, you get to see a different side of people. Their most embarrassing moments, their worst days, the things they cherish deeply. There's plenty of stories to tell, as my husband well knows. He told me I should share some of them with you. You can tell a lot about people from the locks they choose to put on their doors. Some indicate ignorance. Some belong to those interested in tight security. Some tell you about where a person came from, and some locks are just plain weird. There was this one case where I got called out to a family of 3 who had locked themselves out of their own house. According to the mother, they had left their keys in a coat pocket. It was warm weather that day, unusually so for Januaries, so they had gone outside without it and forgotten them. This is the single most common thing I get called out for, plain negligence. I sighed, looking over at their 7-year-old boy who was trying to lure a cat from under a car to pet it. After confirming ownership of the property, I set my toolbox down and took a look at the lock. I paused for a moment before smiling. It was a Wellington 5 lever, old brass, a little oxidized. Now I live and work in Philadelphia, and I had never seen one of these things in real life before. Broadly speaking, lever locks are more of an old continent thing. They mostly see use in the UK, and even among them, this looked like a more obscure model. I pointed at it and asked the mother about it cheerfully. She just shook her head. "I don't know, miss. It was there when we bought the house." My smile faded slightly. I asked her if she had replaced or rekeyed the locks since moving in. She shook her head again. I cleared my throat and gave her the friendly but firm advice to change them. I can recommend this to everyone. Previous owners don't always have the best security practices regarding their keys. After the short lecture, I inserted the turning tool and tried the levers until I heard the mechanism turn. I pushed the handle down. The door swung inward and a small gust of air blew out. The thing that surprised me was the smell. Spicy, sickly sweet. A hint of fermentation. I recognized it. The smell of something dead. I looked down the hall. The interior was a bit dated. I turned my head towards the family. They were overjoyed, shaking my hand and thanking me profusely. The little boy pushed past me and ran inside. I watched him disappear around a corner. I couldn't help but feel something was wrong. I told them I had to use the bathroom, asked if I could use theirs. They agreed, and I entered. The house had an unusual layout. There was a spiral staircase in the middle of the open living room that led up to the loft. The living room was messy. There was a trash bag in the corner and child's toys everywhere. It looked like it hadn't been vacuumed in a while. The smell was coming from upstairs. I ascended the stairs and continued towards the source. It was coming from a closet at the back of the hall that connected the living room to the second floor bedrooms. I walked down the hall and put my hand on the knob. I waited for a moment, then turned. On the floor was a cat. It had been dead for a while. Maggots nibbled at its partially desiccated body. The smell hit me like a truck, overwhelming. I stared at it for a moment, longer than I needed to. A small thing, trapped in a dark place it couldn't get out of. No one had heard it. No one had come looking. I hurried back downstairs. The parents had settled into the living room, looking up at me as I came down the staircase. I panted for a moment and told them their cat was dead. They stared at me. "We don't own a cat," the mother asserted. I wasn't sure if I should laugh. I opened my mouth, closed it. In the end, I just led them up the stairs, flinging open the closet in front of their eyes. They didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. The mother looked away, clearly disturbed. Then the arguing started. They assured me no, insisted that they had never had a cat. Not only that, they said they had never seen this one before, not in the neighborhood, never. In this line of work, you get a sense for when people are bullshitting you. I could tell this wasn't that. This was something else. I believed them. I stared at it for a moment longer than I needed to. It's a bad way to go, getting trapped somewhere with no way out. Sometimes there's nobody to open the door. I wonder what that must feel like. To this day, I don't know how the poor thing made it into that house, up the stairs and into a closet without the residents ever noticing. Nor do I know who closed the door behind it. For their sake, I hope they replace their locks. I've learned a rule of thumb working this job. The stronger the lock, the stranger the case. The previous story was a good example of that. Lever locks are secure by their obscurity. Unfortunately, I've encountered that specific lock twice since, both under worse circumstances. I don't want to write about those cases. Instead, I want to write about an experience that still gives me a watched feeling from time to time when I'm alone at night. It was 3 a.m. I got called out of bed by a client claiming to have been locked out of their house. Same as usual. I grumbled and got out of bed, cursing our 24-hour policy and driving over to the address provided to me. It was way out there, near the edge of the Wharton State Forest along Orchcourt Road. I eventually passed the entry sign. Took me nearly an hour to get there. I almost thought I had the wrong address. A little past 4 in the morning, I found it. An old townhouse. 3 units side by side, just off a dead-end road that trailed into the woods. Dutch-looking architecture, or close enough to it. Like something pulled from an old-fashioned town center, except this was in the middle of the forest. For reference, every house I passed up until this point was a standard single-story suburban unit. I stopped my car and got out. It was cold. I rubbed my hands together and zipped up my coat. The only sound was the wind. No insects, no animals, just the occasional rustling of the trees overhead. I felt uneasy from the moment I got out of the car. I turned on my flashlight and pointed the beam towards the house, nearly jumping when I saw the person standing in front. It was the young man who had called. He was about my height, a bit chubby with round glasses. He stood at the bottom step to one of the units. I wondered how long he'd been standing there in the dark. I approached and greeted him, coming up the steps and staring at the townhouses all the while. He smiled and thanked me for coming. I pointed at the houses and asked how he ended up here, living in the middle of the woods. He shrugged and said the rent was cheap, that the forest and hiking trails were a nice bonus. I asked him what the story behind this bizarre building was. He just shrugged and said he didn't know either. I was getting increasingly suspicious the more he talked. He seemed oddly distant. I got the distinct impression he was hiding something. The state of the townhouses didn't help the matter. They looked abandoned. My initial assumption was he was looking to squat there. But now I'm not so sure. I asked him for proof of ownership. He shook his head and with a solemn face told me everything was inside. He said it like that. Emphasis on everything. I narrowed my gaze, looked at the door. The lock was a Medico high-security tumbler mechanism. I recognized it immediately. It's the kind that jumps out to you in this field. It told me whoever put it there really cared about security and was willing to pay hand over fist for it. I looked back at the young man who was staring up at the building with a warm expression, as if it were a beautiful sunset. I followed standard protocol, asked him if, in lieu of documentation, he could describe the interior. He looked back at me, smiled, and nodded. So, there's an entryway that leads into the living room. I nodded, grabbing my notepad and starting to write. It's more deep than wide. There's a kitchen in the back and a rear view window. The second floor has a bedroom. I stopped writing. He was describing every townhouse ever. None of this gave me other than a vindication of the bad gut feeling I'd been getting. No, sir, I need details. Can you be specific? He stopped for a moment. His face got very serious. I half expected him to get upset at me. A liar caught in the act. Instead, like a switch turning, he went back to his warm smile and looked back at the house. Of course, my mistake. Quite all right, I said, grasping my pen a little tighter. Let's try again. He tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to remember something he knew perfectly well. The entryway has hardwood floors. There's a scratch near the front door. A long one, like something heavy was dragged across it. The walls are painted an off-white. Not quite cream. Someone painted over the original color and didn't do a great job of it. You can still see the old color near the baseboards if you look closely. I wrote it down. My hand had slowed. The living room has a couch against the left wall, dark green. One of the cushions doesn't sit right. The stuffing's gone flat on the right side. He paused. There's a bookshelf. More decorative than functional. A few paperback sci-fi novels, some picture frames. One of them is face down. I stopped writing. He said all of this the way you'd describe a painting you'd spent a long time standing in front of. Fond. Unhurried. I stayed absolutely still, hanging on to every word. There's an alien poster in the master bedroom, an assorted calligraphy set, an unfinished drawing of a park with a cartoon emu in the middle. That's about it. My breathing grew shallow. I just kind of stood there, looking at him. He had described my house, my bedroom, my drawing, the face-down picture. Every single detail was perfect. I nearly dropped my pen. He still had that distant, fond look on his face. He looked as if he had described his childhood home. My jaw clenched. I excused myself for a moment, went around the corner, and quickly dialed my colleague's number. I wasn't sure what to say to him. I just told him something was wrong with the client and to come quickly. He said he understood. Promised me he'd be there soon. I put my phone down, texted him the address, and turned the corner. The client wasn't there anymore. I looked around. Just empty forest, gravel road, and the building beside me. Called his name? Nothing. I spent a few minutes shining my flashlight around, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. I didn't see a sign of him. No vehicle either. Eventually, I gave up and just sat in my own car, waiting for Paul. 30 minutes later, I saw the headlights of his car coming down the road. He got out. I told Paul what happened. He was as unnerved by the sight of the random townhouses as I was. Still, we were curious. After some deliberation, we agreed to unlock it like it would be an actual challenge for once, considering the lock in question. Those high-security things take a while. You sort of have to rotate the pins in a way that's really hard to do even with our specialized equipment. The first light of dawn was turning the sky a deep purple by the time we got it open. I gave Paul a high five and we turned the handle, entering inside. It was empty. I don't mean it was unremarkable. I mean it was completely empty. No furniture, no wallpaper, no upper floors or any staircases leading up there. Just empty space starting from the foundation and going up to the roof 3 stories up, like someone built the exterior as a facade to hide something. Except there was nothing to hide. Just a void where an interior should have been. The longer I stood inside, the more I got the feeling I wasn't supposed to be there. The kind of feeling you'd get if you were trespassing onto government property. The kind of feeling that screams you're not alone. Paul and I didn't say anything. We just looked at each other, backed out, got into our cars, and drove home. I spent the rest of the night with the locks of my own house. I rekeyed everything in silence. I tested the old keys to make sure they didn't work anymore, glancing over at the scratch near the entryway and latching the deadbolt as I did. People are a lot like locks. Everyone has their own mechanism of action, a hidden key. If you know how to unlock them, you've effectively solved how to deal with them. Everyone has desires, fears, secrets they would never tell anyone. Figure out how they tick, and you can be their best friend, their strongest business partner, or their worst enemy. I was supervising Paul as he tried to sell a pair of locks to a 50-something-year-old gentleman. The customer was continuously convinced Paul was trying to upsell him. "I just want a lock, damn it," he insisted. Paul, oblivious, kept trying to explain the pros and cons of each one. Each time he did, the man got more agitated. I stifled a laugh. Eventually, I put an arm on Paul's shoulder, took him in the back, and told him to pick out the cheapest, shittiest lock he could find. He did, and the 2 of us returned and presented it to him. "About damn time," the man said, tossing a wad of $1 bills on the counter. "Have a good day, sir." He mumbled something and left in a huff. The moment the door closed behind him, I began laughing. Paul quickly joined in. A credit card or a firm yank would get past that thing. Our shared amusement was interrupted by the phone. I picked up. A woman answered. She said she had been locked out of her home and needed help getting back in. Her voice sounded stiff, controlled. I told her I would be right there. I turned to Paul, asking him not to burn the place down. He helpfully replied he would not try to rub 2 keys together like fire starters. I grinned. When I arrived, I was surprised to see a man in his mid-30s sitting out on the steps, smoking a cigarette thoughtfully. He had black hair, a bit of stubble, and the expression of someone too tired to do anything but sit there. I double-checked the address. This was it. I walked up slowly and greeted him. He seemed distant, taking another puff before answering. I asked him if he needed help getting the lock open. I guess. Strange. Not often I get called over to help someone get in and arrive to find a completely different person outside. I asked him for proof of ownership. He didn't hesitate. He unlocked his phone and showed me the lease. 2 people. His name was Thomas. The other was Sarah. I presumed she was the one who called. I asked him if Sarah was home. He shrugged. I walked up and rang the doorbell. Waited a minute, no response. I looked back at the man. He had put out his cigarette and was just staring off into space now. I paused for a moment too. The sight felt so surreal. I looked back at the door, took a better look at the lock. It was worn. The wood around it was scraped and damaged. It looked like it had been replaced. Poorly. And more than once. I sat down next to him. How long have you lived here, Thomas? His eyes darted to one side for a moment. 7. Years? I asked. He turned his head to look at me, tilted it a little. Months. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind. After what felt like a century, Thomas asked me a question. You ever been in love? I thought for a moment. You could say that. Thomas looked forward down the steps. With a man? A woman? I turned my head slightly. I don't judge, Thomas shrugged. With a lock, I answered. Thomas smirked a little. Have you ever heard of the multi-lock MT5 Plus? The keys are 3-dimensional. They unlock 2 sets of pins at once. One at the bottom, one at the side. Thomas nodded along slowly. It's the most complicated lock I've ever worked with. Picking it feels beyond me. When you look at a mechanism like that for long enough, you start to appreciate the exterior qualities of it, the smoothness of its design, the little quirks, the way the mortise locks perfectly into the wood of the door. Thomas paused for a moment, beginning to understand. Does the lock love you back? I leaned back slightly. I think so. It's hard to tell. I can only look through the keyhole. The 2 of us sat in silence for another minute or so. A child blew past us on a bicycle. One of the neighbors put the trash out. A crow flew overhead. She gets this dimple. Thomas started touching his right cheek, on the side of her face when she smiles. I turned to him. He was staring into the distance again, an expression as if he were witnessing a slow-motion tragedy far away and was powerless to stop it. He asked, almost inaudibly, I wonder what happened to it. I stayed silent. She does this thing when she finds something funny. She starts snickering before she even gets to the punchline. He almost smiled. Can't help herself. Thomas sighed. She's the smartest person I've ever met. Not book smart necessarily, just walks into a room and reads it in 10 seconds flat. He paused. I've never been able to do that. I say the wrong thing at the wrong time. I don't always know when to push and when to leave. Well enough alone. He picked at a thread on his sleeve. I guess I knew it was going to be like this from the first, Thomas muttered. Thought it was just the stress of moving. Thought we'd get over it. Deep down, I knew better. He was starting to choke up. Several seconds passed before he continued. Every time she avoided me, it felt like I had broken something. I never knew what it was until it was too late. I'm starting to think, it's me. I'm the mistake. God. Thomas began to sob into his hands in a way that almost sounded like a laugh. I reached out a hand toward his shoulder but stopped before touching him. I pulled back. I sat there watching the sun set for a long while as Thomas's sobs grew quieter. Eventually, the weeping turned to sighs, and the sighs to silence. I sat there for a little while still. The clouds were painted in orange and pink hues, contrasting against the sky's deep indigo. "I wish I didn't have to love," Thomas whispered. I looked down and pursed my lips. My toolbox sat motionless on the steps. I grabbed it and began unlocking the door. Thomas sat by quietly. After a minute or so, I was done. I swung the door open, which turned directly into the living room. Sarah sat at the table looking at me. Her eyes were red. I understood then. She could have opened it, physically speaking. Instead, she called me. I didn't stay long. I got my payment and went home, glancing over my shoulder as the door closed behind Thomas. I drove home, staring out at the road. 30 minutes felt like hours. When I finally parked, I sat in the car for a moment, watching the porch light. Barbara had left one on for me, she always did. I entered without a sound, throwing my coat over the rack carelessly. The apartment was dark. The last train had already passed. The walls blocked out the traffic, leaving the interior in silence. On the couch was a figure. He sat perfectly still in the darkness, the only light from the window. It stopped just short of his face. I closed the door behind me and sat down next to him. Then I lowered my head onto his lap. He didn't react. "How was your day?" I asked. He didn't respond. I nodded. "Are you hungry, Emmerich? I was thinking I could get us takeout. Thai, maybe, or I could make something." He didn't respond. "Thai it is." I turned onto my side. The vase of roses on the coffee table. Barbara, she'd been the best caretaker I'd ever met. I stared at the petals for a while, then reached out and touched one. It was starting to brown at the edge. I turned back, lying on my spine, looking at the ceiling. "I had an interesting case today," I said. "You'd like this one." I shifted, getting comfortable. Family of 3 locked out of their house. The kid was trying to lure a cat out from under a car. The lock was a Wellington 5 lever, old brass. I'd never seen one before. I waited. Sometimes he made a sound, a tiny exhale that might have been a laugh. "Not tonight. You're so quiet. You had so much more to say yesterday." He didn't respond. I sat up slowly. On the nightstand beside the couch, he slept here now. It was easier than the bedroom. There was a glass of water. The surface was perfectly still. I stared at it, willing a ripple. Nothing. You'd talk to a deadbolt before you'd talk to me. He'd said that 7 years ago, standing in the doorway with a suitcase, the argument still hot in the air. He'd been right. I'd spent so many nights in the workshop, picking a Medico just to feel something click into place. While he sat alone in the dark, I stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. Didn't drink it, just held it. When I came back, I sat on the floor in front of him, my back against the couch, my head just below his hand. His fingers were warm. They didn't move. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words hung there, too small, too late, said too many times. I looked over at the face-down picture of the two of us. I wondered if the townhouse client had known about Amrich's condition too. I got up, locked the front door, and came back to the couch. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the water glass on the nightstand was casting a small reflection on the wall. The street light bent through the glass. It trembled slightly. Maybe from a passing truck. Maybe not. I watched it until it stilled. I lay down beside him, my hand on his chest, feeling the slow rise and fall of a man trapped in his own body. Between us sat the only lock I'd never been able to open. "Tie tomorrow," I whispered. "Tonight I'll just stay here." If you're still here, you just made it through one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in the internet. Most people clicked away. You didn't. That means something. I want to know, and do you think this actually happened, or is it just a story? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video gave you chills or kept you up at night, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more stories like this. Subscribe to Mikey Blocks and turn on the bell, because the next story I found is even darker than this one. You don't want to miss it. Until next time, stay safe out there.